take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Good evening. It is Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. And you caught me again. It's Juxtaposition. It's the 11th of October for those of you who are just tuning in, folks who maybe haven't had the opportunity to see the program as of yet. We are here every second Wednesday, just in case you want to catch up with us. So we're coming live every second Wednesday, but if you follow CCTV, you can just dig us up in your archives. I was just looking back over the archives over the last year or so. You can also find us over on their YouTube channel. But yeah, come and check us out. You can definitely find us here. Today's episode, All Systems Go. All Systems Go, a Vermont Racial Justice Alliance community television and CCTV program, Media for Democracy, town meeting TV program, Juxtaposition, issues affecting Black folks and Black folks effecting change. Black folks affecting change. All systems go. All systems go. All systems go. I've heard that. I was thinking about that term, all systems go. And how many people remember? I know a lot of folks remember just when the rockets take it off. 5, 4, 3, before the takeoff, all systems go. I'm also a retired Army officer, and one of the things that I'm used to hearing, I mean, it was years and years ago. Is, yep, we are a go. We are a go. It's like one of those things where it's the clearance to take off, and so all systems. That means every single aspect of the operation has passed the check. Every single one, check. Everything is ready to go. Now, what if I told you that there was an acknowledgement in the state of Vermont that all systems are a no-go? No, really. I mean, what if the conversation that we were having is that every single system in the state of Vermont, the state systems, was flawed? How could that be? I mean, it's a state. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, how could that be that, where it's a state government? I mean, of course it's working. It's the state, duh. But what if I told you that the top cop, the Attorney General, and the civil rights apparatus, the Human Rights Commission, what if I told you that here in Vermont that both of them acknowledged that racial disparities exist in all systems of state government? What if I told you that? It's ridiculous. I mean, how could that be? I mean, theoretically, I suppose it could be. I'm just having I think many folks would have a hard time acknowledging that it does. And I don't know that we'd hardly ever get anybody to go on record. But I've got this report right here. This is a report. And the strangest thing about this report is, well, maybe it's not the strangest thing, but it's actually 6 years old. This report, 6 years old. And this is the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission's task force. This is their report. This was Act 54. So the work that we were doing in 2017, what some people know produced the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel, acknowledging that there were indeed racial disparities within the criminal justice system. They were charged, and their mandates continue today with evaluating the disparities that exist and mitigating those disparities across the criminal justice system. Fair enough. Now, watch this. What wasn't really, what we weren't paying attention to was the fact that there was a separate task force that was put together that was charged with looking at disparities across all systems of state government, and that was the Attorney General, as well as it was the Human Rights Commission. So the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission, the Executive Director of Human Rights, they got together and they created this fancy schmancy report. Now take a look at this slide. The premise of the whole report was, and I think that slide might be coming up maybe. Yeah, there we go. So racial disparities across all systems of state government exist. So now, what is this? What are we talking about here? Racial disparities across all systems of state government exist. We also, there was some uncertainty on how to go about addressing them. So the AG, the Attorney General, and the Human Rights Commission's director, as well as various other stakeholders, they were charged with analyzing the problem. And so you would ask yourself, well, this seems pretty big. This seems pretty huge. Who's the oversight authority? If we're going to fix an issue that exists across all state government that has to do with racial disparities across all systems of state government, whose lap does this actually land in? Who does it actually come back to? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's actually the Joint Justice Oversight Committee that they would decide on the course of action. And it just makes you wonder, though, with this challenge, how's this working out? I know when we first started talking about it, there was a lot of conversation, and I kind of joke about this next slide, but there's a lot of conversation about, where does it, where are we really having our biggest challenges in the control booth, if you can bring that one up. But you can see that here, obviously economic development, employment, all these other systems. And it was almost like when the conversation first started, it was more like a where does it hurt conversation. And what we were telling them, thanks for that slide. What we were telling them it hurts everywhere. It's one of those things where, we really got to pay attention to the fact that when we're dealing with something on this level, that it's really affecting us on all levels. So again, we understand the premise, we understand where it hurts. The thing is I think the challenge here is as we have this conversation, as we talked this through today, the reason why I thought this was such a good topic, and honestly, it's so big, I didn't even know where to start talking about it, because meanwhile, when we walked away from this work, and I wouldn't say we walked away from it, because the next day we created the racial equity advisory, or the executive director of racial equity. We know that we've had reparations bills in 2019, in 2020 and 21. I know 19 and 20, when we first discovered this, one of the things that we did was we decided to really try to beat on somebody's drum and get their attention. Take a look at this right here, this slide here. What we were trying to do is to say, hey guys, hello, maybe what we should do is actually stop holding ourselves out to be something that we're not, because we know that what we're looking at here is the fact that, thanks for that slide, we've got some challenges. We've got some serious challenges. So yeah, we started having these conversations. We were really perplexed, but we just continued doing the work. But we didn't look back so much at Act 54. Many people look back at the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel, but nobody, well, I won't say nobody, but the question is are we really pulling all of this together? Are we really pulling all of this together? We did see the Health Equity Advisory Commission. It materialized. That's one of the policies that we did in fact put forward. We also see the Land Access Opportunity Board was one of the initiatives that were in play. But what we're seeing is this piecemealing, and then there's just this painful step by step, the one step forward, two steps back, and just committee after committee after committee, just talking to legislators and honestly just trying to get them to dial in to the fact that, hey, folks, the Attorney General of the state of Vermont and the human rights apparatus, the civil rights apparatus, the Human Rights Commission, the executive director, they've already taken a look at this and they've come to a decision that this is a challenge. In fact, it is the reason why we created the racial equity executive director's position in the first place. Now, some would also remember that we later down the road, we also created this joint resolution that racism was a public health emergency. Now take a look at this. So I like this guy. This is Joe Fagan. That's Racist America, the book with Kimberly Ducey. So what we've forgotten here, I think what we keep forgetting, and those of you who are watching, we've got to just keep going back to this definition of what systemic racism is, because it was, actually Act 54, which I just shared with you, and I'm going to take some time to unpack it a little bit for you in just a second. But I want you just to stop and take a second and take a look at that definition, and then we'll come back to what we're really talking about here. Is that unjustly gained political economic power of whites and the continuing economic and other resources along resource inequities along racial lines, the white racist ideologies and the attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. Racist realities are manifested in each of society's major parts. Each of society's major parts. And I think, thanks for that slide. And I think what we're getting at here is well, yeah, of course, there are racial disparities that we're realizing out of all systems, out of all state systems. Of course we are. I think it is notable and it's incredibly important that we remind ourselves that it is a finding and that it is on record. This is a legislative document that we've already come to that conclusion. In R113, the joint resolution that racism is a public health emergency, on its surface, it just sounds like, oh, it's a public health emergency. But when you open it up, what it is it's a deep commitment of the legislature to eradicate systemic racism. So either somebody is having a hard time figuring out what systemic racism is, they've forgotten the commitments that they've made, or they've forgotten the research or the findings that the Attorney General has and the Human Rights Commission Executive Director have come to, or people just said, screw it, we're just not going to do the work. But at the end of the day, at some point or another, we do have to stop talking about whether or not we have the latitude to do the work. Whether we have the latitude, and what does that mean? I think like an episode or a few episodes ago, we talked about hiding behind objectivity. And I sat on, oddly, the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panels, their last meeting, which was just on Tuesday night, and listened to them pontificating and contemplating as to whether or not they actually believed that there were disparities in a certain system. And I couldn't believe my ears. It took everything I had just to be quiet and not to say anything. The truth is we ought to be surprised when we don't find it, but we should always be setting up measures to counteract it or to mitigate systemic racism. You might ask, take a look at this slide. You might ask, well, what have we done since then? Well, in 2020, we sat down and we had a conversation with some of the key players, across the stakeholders, and we brought them into the Racial Justice Alliance. We had a discussion, and we didn't really see a whole lot of progress there. Thanks a lot for that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission an answer to this? What good can we possibly say that can come out of storytelling at this point? I mean, at the end of the day, do we really need to hear more stories or collect any more additional data? I mean, maybe, but the point being is that there needs to be a unified approach, a whole of government approach. I mean, the Attorney General, as well as the Human Rights Commission's executive director, established it, conducted community forums, and I participated in them in the State House, and provided a comprehensive report with recommendations, which we're getting ready to see. And the question is where did this stop? Where did this park? Why are we not coming back to this? And that's one of the things that I wanted to tell you about it. Take a look at this charge, though. The charge to the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission was they were charged with developing a strategy. And for those who are watching this, think about what I'm telling you. What I've told you at the top of this hour is for crying out loud, guys. We've already determined that racial disparities exist across all systems of state government. Government report right here. Okay. So these folks were charged with developing a strategy to address these within the state systems. Okay. And they named them off. And they were to come back and report to the Justice Oversight Committee. Well, let's just see how that worked out. Okay. So some of the overarching themes that they were working with was to change the underlying culture relating to race. Now, again, these are conversations that we've already had and that are documented in a report that's 6 years old. Teaching children from integrated curriculum, educating about bias and white privilege, increasing representation of people of color, making sure that black folks and brown folks are feeling like they're supported and welcome and taking steps to feel more inclusive. More on the overarching theme, but again, prioritizing the reduction of racial disparity. And with priorities, we know with priorities comes commitment, right? Adopting indicators and benchmarks and performance measures. How do we measure this thing? Again, this was 6 years ago. These are statewide elected and appointed officials who've gone back to the Justice Oversight Committee and said, "Here you go. Here's the report," and provided it in light of these overarching themes. A coordinated approach to data collection, sharing, and reporting. So all of this stuff was actually put out this was over 6 years ago. Can we talk for a minute? Now listen. So here are some of the recommendations and strategies that came from this report. Why am I talking about this? Is because, folks, what we're doing right now we are operating in a manner in which it seems as though most folks in state government could be completely oblivious to this work. Most folks in state government right now, you start talking about the legislature. Again, since then, yes, we have had a joint resolution that racism is a public health emergency. And we said that we were going to go in and eradicate systemic racism. But look at this slide. In the recommendations, and I'll look at this. It says the Vermont state government will devote sufficient resources to reducing identified racial disparities across all systems of state government. I just want to let that sink in, because this was a commitment, this is a recommendation, this was a strategy that was indeed made back to that oversight committee. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote this report, because in this report said that addressing such long-standing and complicated problem is incredibly challenging. Of course it's incredibly challenging, but doing nothing is not an option. Again, I'm quoting this report. We have done that for far too long with predictable results. A new approach needs to be at both the micro and the macro levels. On the micro level, every agency, department, commission, and board must commit to addressing racial bias within organizations for individual employees and workplace as a whole. It's a service delivery. In the service delivery systems, it goes on to say that we should probably use the RBA, the results-based accountability, to improve on the services by identifying those desired outcomes and so forth. So now here's the rubber where it meets the road. So you would think that while all of this work is going on, you'd say, you know, unless we actually get an executive mandate. What does that mean? Unless the governor himself says, look, folks, this is important. My attorney general and my Human Rights Commission executive director has come to me and has come to the entire state and has made very plain that racial disparities exist, adverse racially disparities exist in outcomes across all systems of state government. Therefore, because I'm the governor of everybody in this state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to direct a whole of government approach to address this as a challenge. And we will direct every resource towards this to do everything that we can do to make this happen. Now, let me digress for a minute, because my research indicates that the legislative council is also a part of the Attorney General's office as well. The Legislative Council, these are people who advise our legislators. These are the people who are the staff attorney to the legislature. So again, you know, when we start getting into to questions and discussions surrounding, say, for example, the relevance of the 14th Amendment and how the 14th Amendment has been weaponized to prevent reparatory policy and the apprehensiveness that exists within the legislature as a result of the advice of the Legislative Council, because of their concern with the precedent that has been set in our courts on the 14th Amendment, despite the fact that the 14th Amendment's original purpose, and that is to say the Equal Protection Clause, was to indeed protect black folks and to make sure that black folks were in fact being treated fairly. And it is only because of the fact of the legal precedence that has been caught up in the political conundrum of the supermajority of the Supreme Court that we are using the 14th Amendment for alleged reverse discrimination. If our values in this state are higher than that, and if our Attorney General has already stated that this is indeed a fact, that this is indeed a problem, and the highest authority on civil rights, the Human Rights Commission in our state, has concurred, then we should be having different discussions in our Legislative Council as we advise on reparative policy, not the least of which would be a constitutional amendment for equal protection, which everybody seems to be very silent on. Oh, but there's more. So again, are all systems go here in the state of Vermont? No. All systems are a no-go for black folks in Vermont. And this report right here says just as much. Look at this slide. Here's the other thing that was going on. Part of the recommendations were to ask the governor to issue an executive order requiring each state agency and department to review and, where appropriate, utilize stakeholder suggestions for addressing racial disparities in each system identified in this report. Also, to identify indicators and performance measures that are related to racial disparities in the agency's workforce and services that the entity provides to track as a part of the results-based accountability initiative. There are various other recommendations that this report put forward to bring out in an executive order. In short, thanks for that slide. In short, what we were really looking for was a whole of government approach, wherein which every single time, whether we're talking about the rollout of the cannabis industry and equity related to that, or whether we're talking about housing and equity related to that, or whether we're talking about education or equity related to that, or whether we're talking about employment or economic development or equity related to that, or health equity or health access or equity related to that, that we would not keep running up against the same wall over and over and over again, because there currently is no whole of government approach to address what it is that we've identified 6 years ago by the Attorney General as well as by the Human Rights Commission as to be a real and present threat for Black and brown folks here in Vermont. All systems are not go. So here, as we continue to do this work, what we know is that Act 54 it was a significant step forward. It was a recognition of the glaring racial disparities in our state's criminal justice system. This act mandated the collection and the analysis of race data. And for traffic stop, it aimed to hold law enforcement agencies responsible and accountable for racial profiling and so forth. But also, we had something else that was happening at the same time. The Attorney General's and the Human Rights Commission's report in 2017, it exposed the harsh realities that communities of color in Vermont are facing daily. It revealed that Black and Hispanic drivers are more likely to be searched, arrested, subjected to use of force during traffic stops as well, but also many other stark indicators. Fast forward to 2021, we find ourselves grappling with the implications of Joint Resolution R113. The resolution declared that racism is a public health emergency. It acknowledged that racial disparities in our state extend far beyond the criminal justice system. They pervade our healthcare system, education, employment, housing system. The resolution, while commendable in its recognition, is a somber reflection of the disparities that persist despite our good intentions. Racial disparities are not just statistics, folks. They represent real lives affected by our systemic inequities. They represent children denied educational opportunities and families denied housing, individuals denied equitable health care, and communities torn apart by inequities of our state systems. We cannot turn a blind eye to these injustices any longer. We must work together as a community and as a state to address these disparities head on. We must commit ourselves to the principles of equality and justice and inclusion. We must support policies and initiatives that dismantle systemic racism in all forms, not just through words, but through tangible actions. Our state's motto is freedom and unity. Unity means recognizing that we are all Vermonters, regardless of the color of our skin. Unity means understanding that success of our state depends on the well-being and the prosperity of all its residents. And unity means acknowledging that the fight against racial disparities is a fight for a stronger and a fairer and a more just Vermont for all. So let us be the generation that rises to this challenge, that ensures that our state lives up to the progressive ideals and truly becomes a place where everyone has equal opportunity to thrive. Together we can build Vermont where justice knows no color and where the promise of freedom is realized for all. This is a program, Black folks making moves for black folks. This has been Juxtaposition. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you came out. We're going to see you next time here on Juxtaposition. Issues affecting black folks affecting change. See you later.